Welcome to San Diego Integral. We're a group of integralists trying to realize the state experience of we space. We do this by noticing resonance and holding those moments of coherence when they arise. A few housekeeping notes. Try to mute yourself when you're not speaking. If you can, notice the donation button, and if you feel so inclined, it would help us. And thank you to those of you who have taken the unique attributes survey that I put out there. I'm going to be putting in a chart, and if you haven't taken the survey yet, that would be very, very helpful. Okay, so I know there are new people here, and we would want the new people to introduce themselves, first name, and what brought you to Integral originally. And you have one sentence to do that in. So anyone want to go first? If somebody's new? Elliot, unmute yourself.
Hey, yeah, I'm Elliot. I live in Sydney, Australia. In an hour, I have my own Sydney Integral meeting. So I'm like, I get a double in a day. What brought me to Integral originally? Someone flicked me the theory and I was like, what the heck is this thing? And then I read it and I was like, I don't get it, but I can't see if it's wrong yet. And then I proceeded to stubbornly keep reading Integral for 6 months until it clicked. And I was like, oh, I know what I was missing. Actually, what I was missing was my upper left quadrant. I wasn't there. I was in the upper right very much. And I was like, absorb the theory through the upper right. Anyway, then I got it. And then everything clicked. And I was like, oh, Integral. And that was about 2 years ago. And I'm rocking it and loving it. And yeah, nice to meet you all.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Who wants to go next? Karen, I think. I thought you waved your hand, Karen.
Oh, no, I was just waving back.
I waved my hand.
Nancy.
Yeah. My name is Nancy, and I'm in a discussion group with the wonderful Eloy Mays and Jerry Golick. And we also now have Carrie with us. And so I'm coming to learn more about integral theory. Sorry.
Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
Well, after that, I guess I better speak up. I have been in your meetings occasionally before, courtesy of Eloy. And I'm also in the New Republic of the Heart, so I had a double hit, so couldn't not be here. Aloha, everybody. I'm from Hawaii.
Aloha.
I am Connie. I'm from Kansas, and Eloy also invited me. I've been studying Integral probably for about the last 10 years in relationship to spirituality and spiritual direction, and also in New Republic of the Heart as well, and working with Meg Wheatley. So glad to be here.
Welcome. Speak right up.
I'm Beverly from Atlanta, Georgia, and I also am in the New Republic of the Heart. I was introduced to Integral about 10 years ago. A person in my church was very involved in it and started a group called the Ken Wilber Group. Nobody knew what Integral was. Not many of us knew what Integral was. So happy to be here, and thanks for having us.
Welcome, Beverly.
Hello, I'm Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Mike.
I'm here because several friends and other people mentioned it. I don't know really anything about Integral. I know Eloy a little bit, and so I'm not really here, but I'm going to see if I can learn something today.
Great. Welcome, Mike.
Okay, thank you.
Fabienne, did you want to go?
Yes, so I'm not new to Integral, but new to this group. Thanks, Mary, inviting me, and of course, Tom and others that I know. And I think it was about 9 or 10 years ago, I was working on a research paper for my coaching certification, and my friend Nomi, who is a librarian, gave me Terry's book, The Integral Life Practice, and other things that were related to what I was working on. And that was the beginning of everything that followed.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I am Tracy, and I'm trained as an integral coach. That was my introduction to integral work and Ken Wilber, and I'm just thrilled to be here to get more integral in my integral coachness. Good to see you all.
Welcome.
I'm Helen. I didn't get the brief on what we're doing because I was a little bit late, but I'm in Sydney, Australia. It's probably about my 5th or 6th time to San Diego Integral. I'm also in New Republic of the Heart, so I know a few folks from here, from there, or from Integral Sydney. Hi, Elliot. So just looking forward to Terry's presentation. And
Good to see you again, Helen.
Yeah.
We're introducing new folks. William, you seem new.
Yes, thank you. Eloy invited me. I'm from New Republic of the Heart, and I'm in Montana. I'm grateful to be here.
Welcome, William.
Thank you.
I'm new as well, first time here. My name is Patricia. Eloy invited me as well. And I came into contact with Integral after a big, huge, enormous need of a platform that would help me make sense of years of spiritual work and years of therapy. And Integral suited perfectly.
Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to go?
New people only?
Yeah, I'm Judy, first time new to the group and also invited by Eloy and looking forward to learning more. Thank you.
You notice a pattern here? Eloy knows everyone.
Yay, Eloy.
Oh, and Marjorie's just coming in. Okay, we still get, so co-host, please help me out with the admitting people. So people are
I'm
still,
on it.
still coming in. All right, so I'm gonna, is there anybody else that's brand new?
Okay, so welcome everyone, especially those of you that are up in the wee hours of the morning to be with us. So Eloy, do you want to introduce our guest speaker?
Yeah, so our speaker today is Terry Patton. He's a philosopher, author, activist, social entrepreneur, consultant, coach, and author. He's written a really powerful book called The New Republic of the Heart, an Ethos for Revolutionaries. And I liken him to the Forrest Gump character in the movie, in the sense that Terry's been in all the right places at the right times in the spiritual and integral world. He was a student of Adi Da and a devotee, and worked with Ken Wilber, and has interacted with and interviewed many of the amazing people of our times. Terry's co-author of the Integral Life Practice book, which many of us refer to often. He was involved as a teacher and senior associate of the Integral Institute, and he's often seen at events in Boulder, Integral European Conference, and Bay Area Integral, which he says hasn't been too active lately, where he's the founder and organizer. And Terry created a course in practice called Integral Soul Work, which was the first work I did with Terry. Going on 3 years now, he's been running a social experiment based on the New Republic of the Heart book, and is the host of an excellent podcast series called State of Emergence. He's also hosted the long-running but not now active Beyond Awakening podcast series, and was co-host of the Future of Love podcast, which was, all these were very influential on me. So, and so Terry's been a guiding influence for me in my almost 20 years of being involved in the integral world, and consider him a friend and mentor. And for that, I thank him. And now I give you Terry Patton.
Well, thanks so much, Eloy. And thanks for inviting so many of the folks who are here. It's nice to be here with you all. I'm going to switch to the gallery view so I can sort of have a sense and a feel for everybody who's present. When Eloy reached out to me to do this, we just had an informal conversation, and this title, Making Integral More Integral, came to mind because my history of work with Ken at many turns hinged on a choice. I noticed other people, like almost all of us, have had the experience of taking in the breadth and depth and sweep of aqual theory and feeling, wow, this is a theory of everything. It makes sense of so much. I certainly had that experience when I think especially powerfully when I read Sex Ecology and Spirituality and A Brief History of Everything back in the 90s. And I had been raised, just a brief bio on me, I had been raised in an intentional community, a place called the York Center Community Co-op, which was outside of the church, outside of Chicago. It was founded by members of one of the pacifist churches, the Church of the Brethren. And so I was kind of raised in the postmodern pacifist, civil rights, kind of social, not so much green spirituality, but green social conscience. And I became frustrated. I began to see what we have all lived through, the hellish defeat of our most progressive ideas. You know, that back then it was the re-election of Richard Nixon, but you know, it just continued over these decades. And I knew something more was needed, and I knew that I had to become something more, and that the social change we wanted to create had to begin with me. I had to have a revolution in my own heart, in my own being. I remember getting involved with the human potential movement, and out of that, I found my way to my root guru, Adi Da Samraj, who reformatted the hard drive. My 15 years with him were utterly transformative, and not the topic of our presentation today, but I was given an embodied, experiential, lived transmission of both high states and higher structures of consciousness in ways that really changed me permanently, and you know, for which I'll never stop being profoundly grateful. And I had intuited since I was young that there was a this great turning, as Joanna Macy calls it, this critical moment in the human journey that we're all living through. The crisis on the planet was building. We were aware of this, and I was feeling called to involve myself. So I began working on a book in 2000, which was one of the first drafts of what became A New Republic of the Heart. And when I got that book to a point that I felt it was good enough, and at that point I was really idealizing integral theory, and so the book was kind of all about how the human dilemma needed to be addressed, and the way it could be addressed was through second tier culture, a transition to more adequate stage of development. And so I was just completing it when I got the amazing news that Ken Wilber, the hermit who never saw anybody, was coming out of his life of seclusion to do a couple of seminars in February of 2004. I signed up, I paid more money than I'd ever paid in my life for an educational experience, and I showed up with a draft of that book and gave it to Ken, and he invited me to become one of the people who later then created Integral Life Practice. And so my experience at first was really being mentored by Ken and being just a fully aligned enthusiast. It was true that I had met in Adi Da someone who was enlightened in a way that was profoundly transfiguring, even beyond. I mean, Ken is a remarkable being, and there are many ways that he's psychic, not just brilliant, but truly a multidimensional being. But I had met somebody who was enlightened in a way that went beyond what I was encountering with Ken. And so I was not quite, I wasn't projecting every possible wonderfulness imaginable on Ken, but I wasn't at all critical. I was mainly just interested to discover all the remnants of green in me and really wake up so that I could participate in this second tier to second tier culture and educational process that we were endeavoring to begin to bring. Because fairly soon after that first meeting, I began coming to Boulder and having meetings with Jeff Salzman and Diane Hamilton and Hui Lam and Bert Parlee and Willow Pearson. There was a whole group of us that were the first leaders of these seminars. And as time went on, a new phenomenon began to go on. There was, for one thing, I began to notice that Ken did not, he doesn't tolerate fools gladly and in a very legitimate way, but he was also almost hypersensitive about critics. He would kind of blast them. It wasn't like he was interested in what the criticisms were and was engaging his critics. And that was, well, a little disappointing on one level, but what I also noticed was that many people were being critical in a way that wasn't really necessary, that this enormously powerful series of distinctions, levels, lines, states, types, quadrants, levels, lines, states, types, along with a sixth that he admits ought to be one of the five key distinctions, bodies, because gross, subtle, causal, non-dual states and causal, subtle, and gross bodies are not exactly the same thing, but anyway, that those distinctions accounted for so much of reality that it was, able to be capacious enough that it could hold a lot of the experience that people were coming in with as a criticism. So the different approach that seemed obvious to me was, wait a second, this theory can account for the thing. People were basically feeling something's left out here, and there must be a flaw in the theory. And the theory privileges cognition, and the theory is agentic, the theory is too hyper-masculine, the theory is this or that. They'd have their critique, but in fact, how we use the theory determines what the theory is. The theory is what the theory does. And that if we understood that there were aspects of reality that were accounted for in aqua theory, just they weren't the things that Ken Wilber personally happened to be inclined to speak to. And so that became something quite early on. I was maybe 3 years into working pretty intensely with Ken and everybody else at II in that first phase, when Ken began talking about what he called the 1, 2, 3 of God. The fact that we can have a first person, second person, and third person relationship with spirit, with divinity. And this was really exciting to me because my spiritual life with Adida, a big part of that had been devotional, and profoundly so. One of the greatnesses of Adida and his way of teaching is that he had his way. When I first came to him, Adida's teaching was called the way of understanding. He didn't actually have the guru worship stuff at all. The first year and a half, he came up with another way, the way of divine communion, only after I'd been there maybe a couple of years. But because there was this radical discrimination, this discernment, this process of inquiry and recognition and resting as the awareness that is, the witness, real, actual recognition of what Adida sometimes called the feeling witness. This is an embodied witnessing. The way that the devotional path had been taught was an illumination. It was not a regression into a false dualism, but an elegant expression of the highest non-dual understanding. So it became immediately apparent to me, and I was on phone calls at the time. We were doing something called Integral University in those days. I said, Ken, there are different expressions of the first person relationship to God when we especially pay attention to the gross reality, and then the subtle, and then the causal, and that in fact it's almost a different guided experience. And he said, yeah, that's right, that's worth elaborating. So I wrote a whole thing up, and it essentially was first person spirituality, gross subtle causal, second person gross subtle causal, third person. And it was an opportunity for me as a devotee, as a more poetic personality, to really kind of get into it. And I wrote a whole series of things, some of which actually ended up being put into the Integral Life Practice Starter Kit. I also told Ken that I thought this term, the 1, 2, 3 of God, was unfortunate because we already had the 3, 2, 1 shadow process, and why don't we call it the 3 faces of God? So I suggested that modification. And then over time, I began to realize that although Ken was abstractly, in principle, as a map builder, making space for this devotional life, he wasn't actually leading people into it. And that became obvious to me as not a, it's interesting, when I say making integral more integral, I'm kind of talking about all the little ways that I had an awareness of something that Ken didn't talk about so much that I wanted to emphasize, particularly practices that I felt were really important. So in a way, it sounds like a litany of little critiques of Ken, but that isn't how I experience it. Ken is amazing at doing what only he can do in the way that only he can do it. And there's nothing, we don't have to detract from that or look at it as having limits, to recognize that it, in a sense, it sets out an understanding of an enormous territory, and that we can then go and participate in that territory as the unique beings we are, with a lot more freedom. So for me, it became important. Like my very first thing that I did that was like my original information that I had legal rights to, was to get the domain integralheart.com. That's what my email address has been for forever. And so the heart, as I understood it from Adi Da, for one thing, is multidimensional. There's a heart on the left and the center and on the right. There's a gross, a subtle, and a causal heart. They each express different kinds of heart intelligence. And this was something that I knew Ken understood, because Ken had been a deep student of Adi Da, but it wasn't explicit in the way things were being taught. And there was a quality, because of Ken's personality, that made integral seem to many people as if it's all about abstract analysis. And it was so important, I knew, even at the level of the things Ken was talking about, for there to be an embodied, felt, lived relationship to these things. So I found myself at first emphasizing devotion and second person spirituality in order to make integral more integral. And then over a little bit more time, I've noticed that Ken didn't love talking so much about the faculty of feeling. He did a little, I mean, the simple feeling of being, but that phrase actually, you know, he was quite influenced by Adi Da. That's actually a phrase that came originally from Adi Da before Ken used it. And there was something about this recognition that what we know and can talk about rationally and in our discernment becomes if we combine ourselves with it in a rigorous and sincere, generous-hearted way, we feel what we otherwise would just know. And the difference between abstracted knowing about, which doesn't change us, and a felt relationship to an understanding such that it does. So we can't be feelingly present to the profundity of an insight without our own whole energetic being shifting. So I began to emphasize feeling, and then embodiment. And then there were all these issues. There was a lot of pushback to integral in some of those early years over the fact that it seemed to put the indigenous elders at the bottom of the scale and not possessing the same wisdom as, you know, there were complexities, because to some degree, we did have a little bit of a honeymoon time there in 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, when we were first creating II, that incarnation of integral. It was like we were the ultimate in crowd, right? We were able to talk about a system, and we were interested in aspects of the system that placed us close to the top of a developmental hierarchy. And so as much as we tried to deconstruct our narcissism, to some degree it played into, you know, we had a shadow. We had a shadow of our own elitism in those days, for sure. And then the process for me, I began to see that Ken himself was going through a transition in his whole way of being, because he wasn't just a writer anymore and a philosopher. He was actually the singular figure in what was an international intellectual movement of a kind. And he was interested to help that whole thing be healthy as much as he could. And at times he would just notice that something had validity and he would bless it, but it wasn't his to do. He was trying to make room in the integral world for all kinds of co-creators. That was the case right from the beginning. He even said, I think contemporaneous with when he invited me to be part of that early team, I can't really offer people an integral facilitator. I could offer them an integral team, though. It was the differences between the different people he would invite to represent II and the parallax of the aspects of reality that were especially, each of us might shine a especially powerful light on different aspects, and then something integral would show up in the consciousness of the participants in those seminars. And that was a very fun period of time, because some of many of you and many other really brilliant and often quite successful people, really from all around the world, would come to those seminars. There was a whole series of maybe 25 or so, a couple dozen, or even maybe 3 dozen seminars, ranging from 5 to 6 days that we did during 2004 through 2007. And that was wonderful. And the illuminative power of integral, I continued to fully believe in and value. But as time went on, there began to be issues with a couple of other aspects of reality that I didn't feel were adequately included. One of them is soul work. And Ken does account for the subtle and subtle spirituality. But there are many different kinds of subtle spirituality, some of which are best pursued and understood as he did. For example, he did Shabd yoga. He did the Radhaswami teachings, where you're exposed, you get the initiation, the sound and the light, and you have highly subtle experiences. You become very blissful. It is powerful, subtle experience, even astral, kind of higher subtle experience. But there were other kinds of soul work that were much more nature-based and earth-based and mythopoetic. And because in the early days of the field of transpersonal psychology becoming known and used, were a kind of a really, I would say, a traumatic, perhaps, experience for Ken, because everybody was thinking in binary terms. So it was like, well, Wilbur's got a lot of great maps, but Stan Groff has a really good map, or Michael Washburn has a really good map, and who's right and who's wrong, like as if everybody isn't a little bit right. And Ken found himself always getting bashed for, he said this in such a funny way once. He said, well, typologically, I'm a cerebrotonic ectomorph, which kind of means that I'm a big brain with a little thin body dangling down below. And his humor, his self-deprecating good humor in saying it that way totally charms me. And it just, I felt that it was another aspect of the permission structure through which I could go, yeah, that's right. You're not going to exemplify everything. And let's fill this out. This integral edifice and this integral community, the kinds of conversations, the kinds of reference that we had in common, the level of both awakened consciousness and complex structures of meaning making, and an appreciation for emotional vulnerability, and all the different things that make for integral relationships being richer and more satisfying. I was such a champion for that the ways in which something seemed to be left out always looked to me like an opportunity for creative participation in making integral more integral. That's how this title got there. So integral soul work was a particularly singular turn for me. I had already, there was a bit of a diaspora in 2007 when Ken had his grand mal seizure, and the old II kind of dissolved, and Rob Smith came in and in effect bought it and turned it into integral life. but then all kinds of different integral initiatives, things like Integral San Diego, Integral Bay Area, Integral, all kinds of diverse integral initiatives began to come into being, really a generation before the things I'm naming, immediately after that happened. And that was a good thing for the integral movement, because instead of it all being low, there was a great church of Integral Institute, you know, back in 2004, 05, 06. And a lot of good came from that. And it was a total honor, privilege, one of the really fun parts of my life to have been one of the holders of the, you know, that particular church, you know, helping it be what it was. But that decentralization really accelerated, and there's been tons and tons and tons of new creativity. But a lot of that creativity has followed. There are different kinds of creativity. You might say there's creativity of content and there's creativity of context. For one thing, that's not the only or necessarily even the main distinction. But creativity of content might be Terry O'Fallon doing a bunch of new original work on the evolution of the Lovinger sentence completion test that Suzanne Cook-Groder had worked in, and training with her, and then drawing these insights having to do with the interaction of stages and states, and offering a new approach through her stages model. That's really rich, and I'm sure a lot of you have gotten into that and learned things and had insights and have appreciated the way it shines a light on various things. But there are also kind of contextual things. And I feel like integral soul work is more in that category, because it's it had been you know, according to integral theory, the highest spiritual realizations are non-dual realizations, Turiya and Turiyatita. And as long as we look at this progress from low to high, and we think of spirituality as just one of our modules of practice, one of our, especially if we imagine it to be a single line of development, a naive reading of integral is like, well, let's go to the top, let's go to the best, the highest, let's go to the most awakened. And one of the really profound, important things that we get from really all of depth psychology, all the Jungian work, all the indigenous wisdom, all the kind of work that Bill Plotkin does, and those of you who follow my podcast, we just released a conversation with Bill today, as a matter of fact, that there's Bill has a map of human development where non-dual realization is an immature early thing, and you don't really get to your maturity as a human being until you go through several layers of soul work. And you have other people like Sarah Beek, who teaches a soul work approach, which just says soul work is the true good thing, and transcendental spirituality, that's dissociated spiritual bypass stuff, that's a big mistake. That's not the true path. And so it became apparent to me that, armed with all those distinctions, I was armed with something even more fundamental, which is a disposition that is really interested in the partial truths that are held, and curious at how all those partial truths can be part of a single reality. And what does that show me about reality itself? Like if I embrace them. So for me, I went through it was an important transition in my own life. My marriage was ending, and I was in the process of doing my own work, recognizing that that what would guide me most reliably through that transition was a relationship with the still small voice of my soul. That there was a way that I was being called that I couldn't completely rationally analyze, that was deep, it was mystical, it had to do, you know, I did do vision quest experiences, I did do medicine journeys, I did a variety of practices, I you know, some dream work, et cetera, the kinds of things that are associated with soul work, yes. But what I was also discovering is much of that world of soul work is not informed by the illuminations of transcendental spirituality and non-dual realization. And that waking up from the dream of ego, as one can be blessed to do in deep meditation and awakening, can become psychologically integrated enough that you're no longer going to approach soul work in an immature way, as if it were my soul, my soulmate, my purpose. Like there's a kind of self-focus where the self becomes transparent through the non-dual realization, and then your soul work informed by that is of an entirely different character. It is about the particularity of your incarnate, unique, Bill would call it your ecological niche in the human and more than human family, yeah. But it isn't about your fulfillment. You know, one of the great lessons, of course, of all the great spiritual traditions is that there isn't any personal fulfillment. Every one of us egos, we get to have wonderful moments that disappear. We get to have apparent victories that then the wheel of life turns and it all turns to shit. That waking up to the impossibility of our personal fulfillment transforms your relationship to the soul work. That was key. So I began talking about integral soul work, and that was an important turning point for me. But all along, I want to invite some questions after I make this one next point, Tom. Is that what you were leaning in about? Yeah. But really for me, because you know, I'd really been mentored by these folks I grew up with, my co-op aunts and uncles, who were all social change activists. And the crisis on the planet was obviously only intensifying. So for me, the transformation of my own consciousness and then the Integral Project were, I thought, preliminary work that we were doing in service of us being able to make a difference in the larger human world. There was a outer work, there was social change that was clearly necessary, our climate and ecocide crises. And so that really had been a big part of what I was grappling with in that first draft of the book I shared with Ken in 2003 and 2004. And when I saw how fast global warming was moving, I kind of had a wake up, and out of that, I began to shift things. And the integral theory had been treated as if it were all about the liberation of the individual and the growth and the development of individuals. And if enough individuals grew, we would have a more developed culture, and that would answer our social crises. And I could see that there were kind of two big issues. One of them has to do with we and we space and relationship and spiritual friendship. And the other has to do just with an attitude of that our civic life, our citizenship in our larger world is a dimension of our being and our humanity that also needs to be a dimension of our practice if our practice is to be truly integral. So that social focus of integral life practice is the other major thing that became for me a focus of a big chunk of my work, and probably is most fully expressed in this book, A New Republic of the Heart, that is kind of my magnum opus. So in all those ways, I've been working at helping integral become more integral, and I hope that's interesting to y'all, and I'd love to have a conversation about that, and then maybe we can go into groups and talk about it. So I want to open it up for conversation now.
Can I get us started? So the history is really great. Jealous I wasn't around during those years. I can't imagine what I was doing. But I really like your description that in some ways, Ken was always better at describing the map than the experience. And then what you just said a moment ago, the assumption that integral was going to develop individual growth and that was going to translate into we, perhaps in an evolutionary way, but not in an immediate way because it wasn't focused on initially, which kind of correlates with Ken's strengths too, being an upper left, very cognitive experience. So as we let go of the dream of the ego and we begin to embody, I'm curious, I know it isn't a sharp distinction, but about what year would you place that it became a little bit more we? I remember the What Next conference, they started talking about we. And then also the Europeans, they want to go right to we. They don't even want to bother with the theory sometimes. So I'd be curious about your perspective on that.
Well, there was one very early influence. There began to be a fair amount of crossover between the Enlightened Next community around Andrew Cohen and the integral community starting fairly early. I was paying attention to Andrew even, before I joined up with II. There was a lot of very important original work, including a dramatic experience of collective awakening that they talked about. And in their language, the evolutionary impulse, it was as if they got out of the way and the evolutionary impulse spoke through many of them in a meeting of some of his more advanced students in a way that they nailed the date and they had a little monument to it at Fox Hollow. It was a big deal. And I think that was the first way that it crested into my awareness as a part of the integral scene. But it wasn't very long after that we had circling begin to be an authentic relating and the authentic relating games, and that kind of approach to we space began to become a part of things a little bit. And then I had the good luck to be at an integral conference in Bremen, Germany in 2009 when Thomas Hubel was also speaking there, and Thomas and I hit it off, and I featured him in one of my Beyond Awakening public conversations, and through that he became known to a lot of people in America, and then a year later I helped him come to the U.S. and I incorporated his, I've more or less been a friend and consultant strategist to Thomas. His approach to transparent communication, I thought, had a great deal of additional developmental elegance and clarity that I think has also enhanced the way we space has been understood and lived. And then, of course, I've shared the experience of some of Patricia Albert's work, and Patricia got connected. So I think that the integral we space conversation is informed by many streams of, David Bohm's Bohmian dialogue and inquiry. There are many, many different streams of we space. Otto Scharmer's presencing, many different influences are available to us, and we do draw on them, I think. And yeah, so I think that dates probably a little of it began happening as early as 2007. It got a lot stronger between 2007 and 2010, 2011. By 2012, when I think we had the What Next conference, it was a part of integral culture and an important part. But it didn't always have a social action responsibility component. And I think that's actually pretty important. I think we're all beginning to see that our development depends upon a world that works, and our responsibility is to be part of making it work. If we're so damn developed, how come we've got to be bringing all that to bear in service of our collective.
Thank you. Can we do a couple more questions before we go in the breakout?
Sure.
Does anyone else have questions?
I have a question. Yeah, sure. Hi, Terry. My name is Sally, and I'm an integral therapist. I'm really so glad that Hubel's work's been included, because I believe that working with collective trauma is part of the application process that needs to happen with integral developmental theory. So that's my particular interest. Is I'm busy working on a book right now on how to apply integral, and I include Thomas's work, and I'm pulling a lot of streams together. So I'm identifying mechanisms for transformation, and I'm obviously drawing Ken's language all the time. And some of those mechanisms that I've identified, for example, would be turning the subjective into the objective, which was one of Ken's favorite phrases. So I'm looking at how to turn the ascending. So I'd just love to have some of your feedback on those mechanisms, and to make integral more integral, how to include those.
Even during the first few years that I worked with Thomas, I shared with many other integralists an attitude that preoccupation with developing our subtle and intuitive, our ability to tap into information in the subtle realm, and kind of to notice dynamics that are non-physical was there's a whole tradition of calling spiritual experiences makyo, that don't pay attention to all that stuff, and your ability to maybe read minds or have telepathic information come in, or whatever non-ordinary knowing you might develop, was not the point. Don't overly focus on that. Well, over time, I've come to a different attitude. I've come to appreciate every kind of human development, including intuitive development, which I think is Thomas shines a particular light on that, because he focuses on trauma, because trauma is the thing that hides from awareness, even from a highly developed intuitive awareness. Thomas notices where the trauma is, because the trauma is a void. Like, he can feel into the person, but then there's something missing. It's just like there's nothing there. And by being attentive to the effects of the nothing there-ness, like what are the dynamics of the shadow of that which is hidden by this void. In other respects, you can kind of infer information, and by being friendly to that in a fundamental enough way, Thomas is pretty good at allowing that which was repressed to erupt, to come into the space in group processes. So I think that we're up against something kind of impossible. Our minds as therapists tend to think about, okay, what's hurting, what's stuck, where's the log jam, where's the brokenness, how can I help the natural healing process flow? And it's as if we're healers, you know, with a, you know, we're fixing it. But the more deeply you get in touch with the larger human condition and the pervasive nature of trauma. I mean, many of you are women. Every one of you is only a few generations away from having the experience of billions of women being essentially chattel. You know, the deep scars of all the different kinds of human injustices, colonialism and slavery, and, you know, it goes on and on. We're the interior landscape of human beings is marbled with horrific trauma. So we can't just go in and fix, you know, it's like whack-a-mole. Like there's too much of it. We can't deal with it as a social resolution. It's as if our trauma has us and we can't escape it unless we have a much more elegant and very different way of relating. I don't think that we can approach, we can approach the trauma in our clients and patients with compassion, and we can be a force for its healing. But there's a self-healing possibility in the individual and in the collective that we have to befriend in an even deeper way. The way my work has evolved, I've come to feel that seeing and being present with the unique, profound divinity of another person and really seeing them with eyes that sees that, and becoming good enough spiritual friends with people that they learn to befriend others in that deep spiritual sense, such that there is this infectious forgiveness and grateful generosity finding its way relationally further and further into the world. Sometimes it seems like it's one heart at a time, but there's something about that intention that isn't it is absolutely personal. You love that person, but it's a commitment that has to be open-ended. And so I don't, when we get into the domain of collective trauma, I think Thomas has some unique things that he can do. We're not going to have lots and lots of Thomas Hubels out there creating those events, though. The healing that needs to happen is going to have to become decentered. And we can be a source of that. And it really requires the attitude of a saint, you know, in a sense. Like you just got to decide to, let's love this world up the best we can till we can't anymore. And let's just get better and better at it. Let's help each other get better and better at it. I'm a student of love till I die. I'm a student of helping you be loved till I die. Like that attitude and that fellowship, that's where I land in relation to that. Because I think that if I try to untie the trauma knot by knot, I'm tangled forever.
Any other questions, or should we go into breakout?
Breakout would be great.
Okay.
Great. So I mean, you guys probably are great at doing your WeSpace, and I don't mean to, but I'm here and I lead stuff like that. So let me offer some ideas. Like as you land in the space, maybe you can take a moment to introduce yourself to each other, and then if you can take a minute or so in silence and really take time to take in and find your way into you know, a friendliness to one another, a kind of openness that really kind of a no limit thinking, so that you're able to share as fully and as deeply and as generously and listen and really give the gift of your attention to one another in as mature a way as you can, then maybe you'll be able to make it really out of sight in these breakouts. And I'll be interested to hear what comes of it when we return.
How many would you like in a room, Terry?
I think 4 is a good number, or 5.
Good.
Yeah. Sometimes people drop out, so you end up with 3, but 4 or 5 would be lovely.
And if you're in a room and there's nobody there, you can raise your hand and call for help, and I can come and assign you to a room.
Cyber oblivion.
So any other prompts, Terry, for the?
I encourage everyone to observe some of the fundamental things, which is to just speak with, you know, genuine beginner's mind curiosity and generosity, and then try to respond to what's said as much as possible, and together try to weave yourself into the richest territory you can, and just let it unfold. Trust it.
Say 10 minutes, Eloy.
Terry's call.
Oh, I would prefer a longer amount of time so people can get a little further in, maybe 15 minutes at least. With 4 people, 16 maybe, yeah. So I had fun with 2 people in my little breakout, and I'm wondering if anything has come forward for anyone that they'd like to bring here.
What I loved about our breakout is you could really feel the expansiveness and people's openness and curiosity. It wakes me up. That alive curiosity wakes me up. It's like, and it actually makes me more happy to be a human. Like, life can give me something, or I can give life something, or does that to me. My breakout did that to me.
Awesome.
Terry.
Hi, Marge.
Hi.
So good to see you.
Oh, it was wonderful to be here with you. And I was amazed. You were reviewing my life as well as your own. As you know, I don't know if you remember, but the first time we ever had lunch was at that conference in 2004. And here's my question for you, Terry.
Mm.
As a unity minister who was very, very involved in both worldwide leadership and leadership in this country, I made a choice, and I was in the right place at the right time to be exactly where you are now. I was invited to be part of Integral Institute, and I said no. The reason was because I didn't have time to do both unity and both. So here's my question. How can we include those groups that are so close to us and yet so far away from us? Unity is a worldwide movement, is the one that I'm familiar with. They don't totally accept me because I'm so deeply involved in Integral. Integral doesn't totally accept me because I'm so deeply involved in Unity. They think that each other really doesn't get it. in part. And it's what it is different views from different stages. And I see that clearly. And I don't know how to shift. I'm trying something. It's starting the day after the inauguration. It's going to be online, actually on Eventbrite. Unity of Tustin hosting it. 100 days of prayer. And it's my deep heart yearning to find a way for people to connect with eloquent listening rather than arguing or even hating. And how do we bring, I mean, there's unity and integral is so close together, and yet in many ways they're still worlds apart.
You know, I know that I just feel buoyed that you're energizing the prayer life of many people right at a time when the crisis of fragmentation in our nation is, and world, is so acute. And I think that the secret, you know, back in a previous life, I once had to go through a sales training, and a couple different sales trainings. It was not my favorite chapter of my life, but I learned something, which is they talked about assuming the close. And when people come up with objections, those are selling signals. You should always know that when they say, "Oh no, but no, that's oh, they're interested." They wouldn't be coming up with those objections if they weren't really serious. And then, you know, what you're supposed to do is say, "Well, do you want to buy it?" You know, because then they can say, "Not now." You just sort of say, you know, you'd assume the close. So I think in this situation, yeah, there may be a bunch of people in the integral world that have an attitude about church going and unity and this and that. And there may be a bunch of people in unity that can't appreciate explicit integral theory. But if you know in your heart that those things are not two, and you live them with others in that attitude, and you do what you do so beautifully, which is to just love them, to be moved by love in all the ways that you are, you'll live in a world that isn't divided, even if some of the people who are in it with you might carry some ideas about division with them. And I think that's the best move. Because if I have to solve these divisions between this group and that, I'm screwed. I mean, my attitude is just, you know, I'm not suggesting you're not already doing it in a way, really. I don't mean to, you know, but this seeing of the divinity of one another, this loving, blessing attitude, this empowering of one another. We need a lot of, we need a phalanx, what, a battalion of saints, you know, we need many battalions. And, you know, we're going to have to just work with whoever shows up. Like who's, you know, who wants to be in that number, you know? Whoever shows up has got to be the right people. Like, you know, it's the first rule of open space, right? Whoever's here, there's the right people. And every one of us can become an empowerer of that generous, saintly attitude and co-creativity in one another. And that is applied integral. And yeah, you might say that when you're doing that, you're operating from a different state, and maybe if you do it with a lot of nuance and you notice a lot about it, you're doing it with a different structure of meaning making, you know. Yeah. But God bless the territory. I want to be living in the territory, and I want to, you know, I want to pull out. I used to always use this metaphor. I want to be like that Indian tracker who's so present in the territory. He notices like, oh, those leaves were turned over and that stick over there is broken, and you can kind of listen to the forest and see everything. But I want a really good map in my back pocket. Now I could have that same really good map and I could relate to it like the bus loads of Chinese tourists who pile out of the bus and they look at the guidebook and they see the Eiffel Tower and they take a picture in front of the Eiffel Tower and then they look back at the guidebook, but they never see Paris. I don't want to relate to the map like that. I want to be in the territory and I want to use it to be more in the territory. The map is how I can really not get lost and really, you know, oh, there's a coolness in the air. That's the ocean that's over the hill beyond the hill. You know, I've got a map.
I have one more question, and that is, can this recording be sent to those of us who would like to send it to our own email list? I would love to do that. This has been one of the best 90 minutes, 2 hours that I've been involved in for a long time. You are giving the world a blessing, and it needs to go further than just this group. So maybe that's a question for the hosts, not you, but that's my deepest heart's desire.
Well, I'm grateful that you want to do that. That's all I'll say. I'll let them, they may need to talk to each other or something.
Yeah, Terry, I enjoyed that you just spoke to something that I was talking about in our breakout group, and this bringing to the kind of more integral portion, this kind of reintegrating right back into sort of magic, you know, pre-mythic things, when before we were started to be distracted by all the various maps, you know, I mean, starting really with the mythic stuff, when our world was the family. So we were really concerned in WeSpace and really relating to the broken twigs and the creatures around us. And, you know, so I like that you just presence that. So I just want to say thank you for bringing that in.
Yeah. It's interesting. Some of the people that I'm finding most interesting to be in dialogue with are very deeply appreciative of indigenous wisdom. And there is a thesis that is often put forward that there was a more whole way of being human in our hunter-gatherer phase. And we were, in many respects, more whole and had a healthier, more sustainable relationship to our planet and all the rest. And I find myself, you know, Ken's whole thesis is up from Eden, you know, whatever that was. We've now developed so much more capacity in a variety of ways. And I think when the map helps me see more of the divinity of anything, it's really working. And when it makes me think I don't need to look at something and that it is uninteresting and drab, it's probably a sign that I'm not using it as well as I could. So if we can stay curious to learn from indigenous wisdom and all that's beautiful about hunter-gatherer lives without having to make a categorical reification of that being the ideal, and we can appreciate all that develops from it and valorize that, maybe we're closer to using the map the way it's really meant to be used.
I think for me it's you know, our attention points are a little different to them, but there's, you know, the same feeling about it. You know, when we feel into the tourists not seeing anything, you know, but we're actually feeling into them and their kind of what it is that they're after and what they're trying to get and what they're liking and what they're avoiding, you know, that's the same openness, you know, creating a much more open-hearted space for the whole world that you're in. You know, that's what feels to me to be the reintegrating of that, rather than, you know, literally doing their practices or something, you know.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'd like to share in my group what happened. We had 2 oldies and 2 newbies in our group. And it was kind of fun because what struck me is it takes courage to show up and to go transparent and to try to resonate with total strangers. And what also struck me is new people is that's the commonality we share as we seek out that resonance and connection with each other. Because why do we show up? Why do we read all this stuff and try to understand, try to language our experience of it in a way that doesn't require an absolute membership or loyalty that's inclusive enough to take on the breadth of the experiences we have? So it was fun. It was fun being with 2 newbies and seeing that hunger and doubt, not sure if they were doing it right. I mean, just being there, they were doing it right. Knowing when it's talking to you, knowing when it's going horizontal and expanding your perspective. That's how we show up. When we feel into each other and we find the 3-dimensionality of it, that's how we do it. So it was fun watching that.
Cool. Lorraine, I saw you raise your hand physically. I don't think in the Zoom way, but why don't you just unmute and talk?
Yeah, there we go. I was pressing the wrong button, sorry. Yeah, our group, I think by the end, I got a feeling at least in our group that we had a moment of we space, and it struck me that it feels what moved us to it was a willingness to share some vulnerability, particularly about where we are on our path. There was one very honest comment about, you know, he mentioned he's not integrated yet, and it was moving. He said it in an almost matter-of-fact way, in a very self-accepting way. And I found myself being very moved by that, by the humility of sharing something about yourself that feels unfinished, especially as compared to your own aspirations for yourself. And that shifted the contact. It shifted the moment. And I just wanted to mention that it's sort of a small thing, a quiet thing, but it was a feeling thing. And when they tapped into their feeling, I immediately felt with them without trying. I mean, it took no effort at all. I was right there with them because they were fully present in their feeling. And that worked for me. And that felt like a real we space kind of moment.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I really love your putting your finger on that. I pay a lot of attention to heart virtues of the heart. And some of the most important, you know, people always think of compassion as the first, you know, heart virtue, or care, which are absolutely the core of it. But courage and generosity are also heart virtues, important heart virtues. One of the things that has been interesting for me, I had never been a teacher. I had been a devotee who had a day job for the first half of my adult life, and then I had a little misbegotten career in sales and in financial services, and then I started a consciousness technology business, and I was a businessman. And yet I devoted my life to the study of the path. And so I became a teacher only in the integral world. That was when it first happened. And as I met teachers and I saw how teachers did things, I discovered very often that teachers hid behind their role, because you can. If you're convening it, you create the nature of the shape of the space, and you can always be shiny and smart and whatever, spiritual or whatever you're trying to be as a teacher. And it's when you tell that story about something you're learning, not just in the past tense, like the thing I figured out and got all together and that makes me more human, but I'm still just perfectly shiny. You don't make the gesture, you just put your finger on. It's when I've been on the path for 50 plus years, and it's continuing to teach me in this moment, and it breaks my butt sometimes, and I don't have all the answers, and I see what's going down on the news and I get scared too, and I ask myself questions about how I can walk my talk better than I do, and I'm still in this school, like I hope. I don't know if that was a great example, but that orientation is a permission structure and empowerment structure for other people that shiny teacher hiding behind the teacher role doesn't offer.
Mm-hmm.
The courage and it's a trust. I'm fucking up, but my fuck ups aren't so bad that I have to hide them. And I can be, the we space is so much richer. I think we were thinking to maybe go in another breakout for a session, perhaps. I want to check in with Eloy and Tom. And,
Yeah, we got time.
I can just roll with it, whatever's. I don't have. An agenda for how it has to be.
Yeah, another breakout would be good. What should the theme be, though?
The theme of this breakout shall be something that will help you get to know me and be closer to me. Is something I can say that will help you know me or get closer to me. Is.
Sounds fun.
How long?
15 minutes again?
We have to limit it to 15 minutes because that's all we got.
Okay. Can you put that in the chat, Terry, the prompt?
Yeah.
And then you guys can see the prompt from the breakout room. So here we go.
I, you know, there is one thing I had, I I am hoping that I will be able to be with you again next month. And I think what we would do would be to go into WeSpace, especially progressively, little talks that set the frame for a little share, and then another, kind of more like that. I'm also going to be doing a thing, a public thing, which I think we're calling it Spiritual Friends Amidst Cultural Madness, on February 3rd, where I'm going to kind of talk about the work we're doing in a new Republic of the Heart. And I hope you'll join us for that.
Do you have a link for that, Terry?
I don't have a link now, but I can share. I will share a link. You know, we will have it within a week or so, and maybe it's something we can share with people later.
Yeah, we can post it later. Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
And definitely when you're back in February as well, then we can get all the info, right?
Yeah. So, what's wanting to be spoken here? Yeah.
I'll share something. This is Liz. That was a lovely prompt, and that was a really rich breakout. My two fellow roommates were talking about family, and it was the most lovely thing, and it like took me right back to the sort of the arms of being with family, and that's been a really tender thing for me. So it was just very, very lovely and rich experience.
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad. We were talking about the places where we feel pain in our intimate life and grief and things, where and yet we were commenting how we all felt fed, that something about people feeling safe enough to share what hurts was really feeding our souls.
It came up too in our group. It was true for me because I'm bumping up against some difficult family stuff just with health of my parents. So it was, yeah, I had the experience of sort of being held in that group as well. It was really nice.
Awesome.
We get time for one more comment.
You know, Tom, if nobody's speaking up, I have an impulse to maybe offer a prayer.
Okay.
Turning to that which is not separate from anything. You who are sparking my own awareness, you who are the life energy pulsing through my body, you who are hearing these words, you who are alive in all these bodies and all these hearts and minds. Please open and relax us all to feel you, so that you may feel and know yourself more fully through us and our ways of showing up with others. Help heal the places where we're contracting, and help us to discover the ever-present opportunity to be truly grateful and courageous and generous, and help us to bless this beautiful broken world and all the beautiful broken people we come across, that you may flow ever more fully, consciously into this world.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Special thanks for Terry Patton and his years of wisdom in this integral movement. And boy, was that prayer spontaneous. I loved it. As Terry has mentioned, he's going to be back on February 13th. And the presentation is going to be experiential WeSpace practices more. So I invite you to come back and join us again. Bring your best self. This is going to conclude the formal part of the meeting. Many of us usually hang out at this point and chat and talk. And if we have a lot of people, we could even break out to rooms if there's a specific chat you'd like to hear more of. But sometimes during this part of the meeting, some of the richest stuff arises is that you put a group of integral people together. I know and many of you do know this too, going through the conferences, it's in those sitting places and gardens and bus rides and monasteries that some of the most amazing discussions unfold when we're tapping the energy of wherever we are. So I invite you to hang out if you want at this point. And
I got one more question for Terry. Did you want to mention the social experiment?
Yeah, I would. Some of the people who are here said they were in a New Republic of the Heart, and that's the practice community that instead of, like, we got to break the mold, so we got to try new stuff. So instead of calling it like a practice community that knows what it's doing, we want to like admit that we really want to be doing something even beyond anything we know. So it's an experiment. So we're trying new stuff, and that's what we'll be opening our doors after this presentation on February 3rd, and I'll tell people more about that when that happens. And anybody who finds that at all interesting, I hope you can get on my mailing list at myname.com or newrepublicoftheheart.org. Whatever, I hope this has been enriching time too.
Please put some of that in the chat, Terry.
Yeah, sure. If you get on our mailing list, you'll hear about stuff.
Yeah, I see now.
Good, thank you, Terry.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think I'm done. I think you're going to socialize, and I'm just keeping it more formal, so I'm going to go away. But I've really enjoyed hanging out with y'all.
Okay.
It's been really sweet.
Thank you, Terry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful presentation.
Thank you.